The pride, passion, and pageantry of college football lives here. This is the Paul Finebaum Show, Hour 2 podcast.
This might be college football heaven.
Second hour is live, and we appreciate you being back. We have a lot happening on this program, and your phone calls are around the corner. But you saw this headline the other day by Richard Johnson, how Nick Saban helped inspire NIL legislation in Georgia that would aid Kirby Smart. Did somebody forget Nick Saban's on the Alabama payroll? Richard Johnson joining us. Always great to say hello to RJ. Richard, take it from the top. How did this come about? Where is it, and what does it mean?
Well, it is always a pleasure to be back with you, my friend. I saw the bill. A friend of mine who lives in Georgia and is connected in Georgia politics kind of sent it to me, and as a joke, he was like, "Can you believe this kind of thing?" Obviously the bill, it's a pretty simple bill. It was introduced in the Georgia State Senate. It's about 25 lines. It's not tucked into anything else. It pretty much only says, Senate Bill 71, that NIL income earned by in-state athletes at Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, or Georgia Southern would be exempt from state tax in Georgia. In the state of Georgia, the state income tax rate is about 5.39%. And that income would be exempt from state income tax. And so, I called the senator. His name's Brandon Beach, the state senator in the state of Georgia, who sponsored the bill, and with four other co-sponsors, and we had a conversation. And I didn't even ask him how it came about. We were just talking, and he told me that he had dinner with Nick Saban and Terry Saban with his wife and another couple at Lake Burton, where I believe Nick Saban still keeps his lake house up there at Lake Burton.
Correct.
And they were just talking, and Nick basically volunteered the idea and said, until Congress or the NCAA or whoever figures out where NIL is going to land, a way that you could help Kirby Smart, who Brandon Beach told me Nick Saban still loves Kirby like a son. Saban basically said, you could do this. You could try to pass a law in the state that would exempt NIL income from state income tax.
So explain, Richard, really what's behind this, because certain states, including Florida and others, have no income tax. So is that part of what we're talking about here, because certain states have an advantage and Georgia doesn't?
Yeah, it's pretty clear. Brandon Beach did not mince words when he told me that the reason this came about is that they want the two in-state schools, mainly Georgia and Georgia Tech, to be able to compete on the recruiting trail with Florida, Tennessee, Texas, Texas A&M, Florida State, those in-state schools in the border states to the state of Georgia. And in order to compete with those states for kids, the five-star kids, the cream of the crop, and high-level portal kids, they believe that this will help. Brandon Beach did not consult anybody at Georgia Tech or Georgia before he volunteered this legislation, before he drafted this bill, I should say. He wasn't approached by anybody at those schools. This was, like I said, this was Nick Saban's idea. As far as I'm concerned, as far as I understand, I think Georgia and Georgia Tech were a little caught off guard by this. That's just kind of my read on the situation. No one's told me that, but that's kind of me reading the tea leaves on this as I reported this story out. I think both of those schools, the Bulldogs and the Jackets, a little surprised by this, taken aback by this, and one of the reasons why they weren't ready to comment to me about the situation.
So, Richard, where is it right now in the Georgia legislature?
Right now in Georgia legislature, it will be sent to a committee next week. And after it gets out of that committee, it will then go to Rules Committee. Now, Brandon Beach serves on the Georgia State Senate Rules Committee. So he was very bullish on thinking that this bill was going to at least get out of the Georgia State Senate. Now, the lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia, Burt Jones, who presides over the state senate in the state of Georgia, played for the Bulldogs from the year 2000 to 2002. He's a walk-on and ended up, I believe, becoming a team captain for Georgia. So he presides over the state senate. So, yeah, you'd imagine there are some favorable lawmakers in the Georgia legislature to such a bill. But obviously, the legislative process is what it is. It could be challenged. It could be shot down. It could be amended. Who knows? But I would say it's very early days for this. And I believe the Georgia legislative session goes until, I believe, April. So there is some time to get this through. But this is very early days right now for this bill.
Yeah, and I can't imagine you want to, now that you've given this a lot of publicity, I can't imagine some state legislator wants to be against something that would aid college football. That would not be smart. Let me get to another story you wrote recently about this complex house settlement. You looked at a number of college athlete contracts. Can you explain what you learned from what had to be a laborious journey there, looking at the fine print?
Yeah, it's not exactly a coffee table read, Paul. I can tell you right now. But in the fall, both the Big 12 and the Big 10, both of those leagues consulted with lawyers to kind of get a template. The league offices did to socialize to their schools, because as we know, for now it's the collectives that are compensating the athletes. But in July, fingers crossed, we hope, it then becomes the schools directly compensating these athletes. And look, I know collective, school, wink, wink, they're separate entities, but, follow me here. So, if you're a kid that signed in December, if you signed with a certain school, then you may have signed both paperwork with the collective to get you through the end of June, and then paperwork with the school to get you from July to the end of the season. And so that's how it's constructed at a couple different schools. And, a Big Ten school paperwork that I looked at, one of the contracts, the one with the school that would cover from July to the end of December, it basically said this paperwork is contingent on the House settlement actually being settled, actually being approved, which we think is going to happen at the beginning of April, but we don't know. If it doesn't get approved, there's no telling what's going to happen then, especially with all this paperwork, all these kids have signed. But, there are a couple interesting things in these contracts that I read with a Big 12 school and a Big 10 school with these football players. First of all, how the payment schedules work, I think is fascinating. It's equal payments in July, August, September, October, November. And then with one of these schools, the payment jumps up in December. And with another one of these schools, the payment doesn't come until either December 31st or 10 calendar days after the team's last game, whichever comes later. And when you take both of those things together, you start to see how the bowl system is going to strike back at opt-out culture and sit-out culture and going early to the draft and portal and all this kind of stuff. All these bowl contracts come up for renewal at the end of this year, at the end of this cycle. And there's a lot of different ways that I think these bowls are going to be able to kind of wrest some control back over the postseason, over the month of December and January. And this is one of the ways, frankly, working with the schools to talk to the schools and say, hey, get it in your paperwork to get these guys to stick around through December. I thought that was interesting. One of the things that I believe is going to become very thorny, a Big 12 school's paperwork that I looked over, it basically said, they can dock pay by up to 50% if they find out that you've got a mental health concern or a physical health concern that's going to prevent you from playing. Well, who decides that? Who vets that? I think that is going to be something that is going to be very thorny should a school try to enforce that clause in the paperwork.
RJ, always great to hear from you. Some very interesting and complex issues, and stay on that Saban bill. I can't wait to check with Alabama folks about the man making $500,000 a year for Alabama, helping out Kirby Smart.
I appreciate it, Paul. You have a great weekend.
You bet. Richard Johnson, always great. We are going to take a short break, and we are back with your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
And welcome back. Let's get to Chris right now in South Carolina. Hello, Chris.
Paul, on this Finebaum Friday, Paul, let's see can I turn the degrees up to hell, Paul, because there's been a little confusion here. It ain't my fault that I wake up in the morning and piss excellence, Paul. Delusional? No, it's called confidence. And let me tell you something, everything, Paul. I'm going to tell you something what I don't need. I don't need you to help me to make my call. I don't need you to answer. I don't need you to take place in the call. Or I don't need to cut my hair, Paul. Chris from South Carolina don't need none of that. Bring the heat every time. And for little Brad, the Bulldog, talking about a competition, oh, you put me against a legend, you put me against a great caller, I didn't have a chance. Paul, I'm going to tell you right now, but Chris from South Carolina, anything to do with this show, it's like playing poker with a deck of Uno cards, Paul. The odds are always stacked against me. And my back, that's when I work my best, under pressure. But they want to sit here and say delusional and talk about me, Johnny B, Squirrel, all of them. Paul, I don't need no help. Let's get it going. Let's go, Paul.
That guy's the best, huh? Susie is up next in Georgia.
I was hoping I would be next, Paul, because one of the things I wanted to say is, Chris, it's going to be a cold day in hell that the Finebaum Nation is going to vote you as the best caller, an ACC caller. It's not going to happen,
Well
Chris.
said.
I'm sorry, but I'm glad that, you live positively. Paul, I love the sweater or the whatever you have on today. You had it on Tuesday under your jacket. Really nice looking.
By the way, this is actually, that was a pullover. Not to get too deep into fashion, this is actually a hoodie. I can
see that,
yeah.
Yes.
By the way, this was a Christmas
like
gift, and it's taken me, when was Christmas? December 25th. It's taken me till February 7th to figure out how to wear this.
Well, you look very dapper in
Thank
it.
you.
Did you watch the game last night?
I sure did. You better believe it.
Oh, God. How exciting. How exciting for that coach. And to be the first one since Pat Summitt to, I couldn't be happier for her and for the Lady Vols. It's great. And one more thing, Paul, I just want to congratulate you. Is it Coach Cochran? Is that his name you had the interview with?
Yeah, Scott Cochran.
Scott Cochran, yes. What an inspiration. I want to watch what his team does this year. Good for him. He should be an inspiration out there to a lot of people that you can overcome, certain things, certain addictions that you weren't intending to be addicted to, whatever. But you do it, Paul. You bring in these people that are, that we don't know about and we get to know, and now we want to follow them. So I thank you so much for everything you do. As always, thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Susie. You be well. You take care of yourself. John is up next in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
Hey, Paul, how are you guys?
We're doing great.
Good. I had a thought about something I hadn't heard too much about. With all the NIL money that's going out to players and the big-time programs are trying to keep up, and it's getting more and more. Do you see in the future, maybe not so near, but do you see this starting to have an effect on the universities themselves as far as the upgrade to facilities, the other programs maybe not being able to keep up paying their coaches, or maybe the baseball coach or the softball coach or basketball
Yeah,
coach?
100%. Let me give you an example. It's affecting everyone. I mean, at Alabama alone, they've been talking about a new basketball facility, as great as that program is, but they can't do it because all the money is going into supplying the football team. And I'm not as concerned about the athletic facilities on a university as I am as you trickle down to, you mentioned some of the sports, but the baseball, the mainline sports are okay, but when you get to the secondary, the spring sports, the sports that don't get much attention, they are going to be affected just as everything on that campus is going to be affected.
Now, the gentleman that you just had on with the legislator in Georgia,
right?
I have a place. I live in Georgia, and I have a place here as well. I don't see how that would be how that would go through with people that I'm retired, but people that still work in Georgia, the guy that has a trucking company or the guy that has a sanitation company, having to pay their people having to pay income tax. And I just don't
agree.
see
Hey,
how
by the way, you have
get...
just said something and whether Nick Saban is for it or against it doesn't make a bit of difference. When hardworking people, local-owned businesses, when folks who are barely getting by, living paycheck to paycheck, depending on whether it's a governmental check, that doesn't matter, and they're paying taxes, and some athlete is not having to pay tax on $1 million or $2 million or buying a Lamborghini. I mean, that's wrong. We're all for athletes. We all want, but this is not your father's college football program anymore. And I would be rather irritated. And this state, and we joked about not wanting to go against the grain, but this is not representation. If you're representing a district in Georgia and they're closing a plant and folks are struggling, and you're saying, well, that's too bad. I'm going to make sure that some kid who's making $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million to play football at UGA or Georgia Tech, we're going to make sure he doesn't have to pay taxes because they don't have taxes in Tennessee or in Florida. I mean, you tell me.
Do you think that Coach Saban behind the scenes has reached out to Tuberville?
I can guarantee you he has. When I saw Tuberville last summer, I was in his office. He told me that Saban calls him every week. But that is, Tuberville's important because he has the ear of the president. But it's going to take a lot more to get Congress to pass that bill than one person.
Well, Paul, I just want to say, I don't get the call. I always try to listen when I can. You guys do a fantastic job, everybody there. Thank you so much,
John. Thank you.
Call.
Great to hear from you. And you call again. Let's continue with more phone calls. And Charlie is up next in Georgia. Hello, Charlie.
Hey, good afternoon, Paul. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you.
Last year I had called you about the Tennessee coach being fired, Kelly Harper, and we kind of wondered if that was really the right decision by the administration. But after last night, and from what I've seen, it looks like they definitely made the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody liked Kelly, and they still do, but you can't get much more significant than beating UConn, which over the history of Tennessee basketball has been the biggest rival. They used to play every year, as you know. They used to play at one time. They used to play twice a year.
Yeah, she has definitely impressed me, and I'm kind of even though I'm from Georgia, I'm a kind of a Tennessee Lady Vols basketball fan, and I think they're going to be winning some championships pretty soon.
Well, yeah, I mean, last night was the breakthrough, and sometimes you just need that moment in time, and she had it. Listen, a week and a half after having a child, that's pretty amazing. Let me check back with Irvin. He wanted to say one more thing here. Hey, Irvin.
Paul, how you doing?
We are doing pretty well.
Listen, I don't know who this Chris person is. Is he an SEC fan or ACC fan?
He's a Clemson fan.
Oh, my God. That's why he's trying to act like he's all of that. This is the ACC, son. You got to bring it because we don't play this ACC stuff. Y'all got basketball, but we got the real deal.
You know what's funny? I mean, the ACC has they have an afternoon show. Not that I've ever seen it, but I know it's on because we have a bunch of TVs here, and I can see it. I think they're talking about lacrosse right now, but maybe that's why he calls over here.
Yeah, lacrosse, Paul. You just said it right, lacrosse. Once again, Alabama fans, Nick Saban is gone. Bear Bryant is gone. Get over it. You're scared. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very, very much. We are up against the break. We have more to come, more of your phone calls, and we are back right after this.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
So Monday, big one. Auburn travels to Oklahoma in women's basketball. Moorhead is calling next. What do you got, Moorhead? Thank you for joining us.
Hey, what's up, Paul?
We are doing great. Thank you.
Yeah, first-time caller, man. Good to talk to you.
We appreciate that.
I'm just Chris, man. Come on, Chris. Chris, probably one of your worst callers. Don't nobody want to listen to Chris. And
true.
For your man Irvin that keeps saying, "Oh, we're Alabama fans, we're scared." Yeah, we know Nick Saban's gone. We understand that, but believe this: Alabama will be back. Maybe next year or maybe the following year, but believe that we will be back. Now, Ryan Grubb, the hire, I don't know much about him. You know, I know he was with DeBoer at Washington and they did well there, but you know, this is SEC ball. But saying that, I believe anything will be better than Sheridan that we had this year. I mean, it was so frustrating watching Alabama football and the offense this year. I mean, Sheridan obviously didn't know how to use Jalen Milroe, and not here to bash Jalen Milroe, but it's just I don't think we could get any worse than we had with Sheridan. But it all goes back to head coaching too, Paul. The discipline issues, all that has to be corrected, and DeBoer has to stern up if all possible. I know Nick Saban's last couple of teams were a little bit undisciplined, but it's time to not just talk the talk.
But you know something, Moorhead, I agree with you, but I know when you take over a program, that is your best moment. I'll spare you you only get one chance to make a first impression, but I think it's always a challenge. And this is from coaches, not from sitting behind a microphone, that when you allow a lax approach and then it doesn't go well, then you suddenly go back and lay the law down. It's even more complex now that you're tiptoeing around these players because you didn't want to lose too many of them in the portal. You lost some pretty important ones, and now you double down on discipline that you've never instituted. How does that work?
Well, I agree with you. I don't know how it's going to work. Like you said, he should have laid the law down to begin with, but to me, it just all stems from NIL. I mean, that's just the era we're in now. Is you're paying these players big money, they get big heads, and why work out? Why be on time? I'm getting paid anyway. You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean, and I talk to coaches all the time, and they don't know how to deal with it. But Nick Saban walked in there in 2007. He laid the law down to his players. He laid the law down to his alumni, and he laid the law down to the media. And look what happened with his success. He was struggling to do that at the end, and DeBoer has not even attempted to do it.
100%. I agree, Paul. But anyway, I just wanted to get on here. I hope it works out well for DeBoer. I'm ready. I'll give him another, year or so. But something has, we're not going to be putting up with 9-4, 8-3. You know that. You know how Alabama football is.
Hey, thank you. I mean, one of the other problems with DeBoer was that the highs and lows ended up really hurting him. The high after the Georgia game, really outside of a title. That next morning, that next week, that program was about as lit as anything I've ever seen. And then he threw it all away. He got it back with the win over LSU, and then he threw it all away again. He didn't really get it back because I don't think the Iron Bowl meant losing the Iron Bowl would have been cataclysmic, but winning it over a terrible Auburn team just simply checked the box. And then all he has to do is beat an absolute bereft Michigan team with most of its starters out, and they weren't all that good in the first place. And he blew that game just to limp into the offseason about as poorly as anything I have seen in a long time. Let's check out Longhorn Jack, who is up next. Jack, what's up? Don't hear Jack. We'll try Vance up next. Hey, Vance.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you.
I just wanted to tell you real quick. I was listening to Greg Sankey on one of your, commercials, and I realized something very quickly. He's a little bit out of my wheelhouse when it comes to how he speaks and his knowledge. This time I understood him completely. I was telling the call screener, sometimes it takes me to watch a movie twice to really get it. So I think maybe in the future I'll refrain from getting – I don't think I was upset at Greg Sankey, but now I heard what he said loud and clear, and my hat's off to him. I got another question for you.
Okay.
I watched I have this horrible habit. Spurrier, they got this. This ties into the caller from California and the hope for Kalen DeBoer. I watched what happened when Spurrier brought in Bob Stoops, and yes, they won a national championship the next year. But truthfully, it was Spurrier putting Danny Werfel in the shotgun that flummoxed Florida State. My question is, the next year, Stoops goes to Oklahoma, and a couple of years later, they beat Florida State 13-2. The 2 points were given to Florida State by an Oklahoma player, and it was all defense. And somehow or the other, he lost that part of his game throughout his tenure at Oklahoma. Does that make any sense?
Well, he lost it to a degree, but it became.
I mean, it wasn't that. It's like he succumbed to the Big 12 way of playing.
Well, you're right, but when you're in the Big 12, you have to be able to score. And remember, his last offensive coordinator there was Lincoln Riley. And I think too, and I'm trying to remember the year it was, but losing the biggest deficit for Bob Stoops at Oklahoma was when Brent Venables left to go to Clemson. I mean, that was a major line of demarcation because Venables was the stalwart of that Oklahoma defense. I'm not saying that Stoops didn't play a role; he did, but they never quite recovered from that.
Okay, here's my question to you, or my concern. Caleb DeBoer, however fabulous his previous record was and all, I'm not knocking any of that. Is he not a predominantly West Coast guy?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's been Fresno, Washington, the Dakotas. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly not an East Coast guy.
Well, that's my point is I hope the direction, and yes, callers are correct. Things were waning at Alabama before Nick Saban retired. That's just a fact. People can hate me all they want. These things are true. But I just hope that I hope that concept, and you just said the key thing to the previous caller, it's hard to take back and just all of a sudden turn into something you're not. Is he not being who he is? I mean,
well, remember the big story about him serving ice cream and everybody loved that. Let me go back a couple of years. Brian Harsin came to Auburn and was a complete failure. I know Brian Harsin to say he's actually a really good football coach. He was a terrible coach for Auburn. Now, you know where I'm going here.
I do.
Kalen DeBoer is a very good football coach. Is he the right coach for Alabama, though?
Well, and the truth is we want him to be.
Doesn't matter.
Of course we do. But, I do.
I was hoping Harsin would make it at Auburn, but he never had a chance, and he really didn't have a chance because the people down there did not give him a chance. Now, DeBoer is getting the support from the administration.
By the way.
But there's already a tune-out with the fans, and I'm not going to give you chapter and verse of all my trips to Alabama recently, but I've been there a few times, and it's anecdotal, but it's consistent. We'll be right back. More of your phone calls after this.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
We're back. Otis Shea is calling us next. How are you, Otis Shea?
Finebaum, hope you are. I wanted to kind of piggyback on the call that was right before Vance about DeBoer just kind of being lackadaisical in the discipline. My question is do you think that, I mean, we can all blame this on NIL. I get that. But do you really think that he was just trying to be like more of a friend, peacemaker, trying to just hold down the fort in the transition, and that's why he didn't? Or does he actually have a history of being that what most people would say a player's coach in the aspect of what he's trying to get through to his players? And I'll hang up and listen. Thank you for taking my call.
So. I think a couple of things. I think he is a player's coach. That's been the rep on him. But I think another thing that got him, remember those first couple of days, it was chaotic. He lost Isaiah Bond. Bond may have left before. I can't remember the timing of that. But he lost Julian Sayin, which was a gut punch. He lost the center, McLaughlin, and mostly he lost Caleb Downs. And I think that would have freaked out anyone, losing such critical players. So I think whatever he was thinking about doing, he ended up not doing. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Let me try Jack again in Texas. So hello, Jack. Jack has struck out for the second and last time. Sean is up next in New Jersey. Hello, Sean.
Hey, Paul, what's going on?
We are doing great. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to come on here and talk about the Big Ten football and the SEC football. I feel like Big Ten football is kind of showing it's a little better than SEC football nowadays.
It certainly had a better postseason.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, like, when you watch, like, the Notre Dame-Georgia game and then watch, like, Notre Dame-Penn State, I feel like that kind of proves it right there.
Proves what?
That the Big Ten football is just taking bigger strides nowadays, I feel like, than the SEC.
Well, I think it's a really I'm not trying to quibble because I know who won the national championship the last 2 years, and I know who won the bowl season, but I think it really depends on how you frame that. Top to bottom, the SEC is a better league, but at the very top this year, it's pretty obvious who was better.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely think top to bottom, SEC might have the better hand, but top of the Big Ten is real scary nowadays.
No doubt. And I think that is going to be the same way next year. Penn State in some polls is ranked ahead of Ohio State. So, I mean, you have – I mean, I never took Indiana seriously this year, so I know that was a little bit of propping up. But Penn State and Ohio State are definitely legit. Hey, thank you very, very much for the call. Trey is up next.
Hey, Paul, how you doing today?
Trey, we're doing great. Thank you.
A guy yesterday named Randy B. from Georgia, I think he said he saw you in a Speedo surfing. Do you think that might have been Bash and he got y'all confused? Because I don't see you surfing, but I can see Bash surfing. What do you think?
I can tell you I've never surfed in my life, so it wasn't me.
But, Paul, yesterday a guy named Tyrone called in putting down Alabama basketball, and he especially put down their defense. Paul, I looked up some numbers. Alabama's averaging 90 points a game and giving up 78. With that schedule, they're still averaging winning by 12 points a game. But, Paul, Alabama's going to give up more points because of the pace of play they play and at the rate they shoot the ball. So it's going to give other teams more opportunities to score. And I was wondering what you thought about that. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and take care, Paul.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bulldog is next in Los Angeles.
Well, I heard that the Alabama call about 20 minutes ago saying that Alabama's going to come back this year, and rightly so. I think they to put my 2 cents in for my Georgia Bulldogs. You know, I've been in the cave since the devastating loss to Notre Dame. Why in the hell are we putting a young quarterback in harm's way, trying to be aggressive in his own goal line? He gets fumbled, sacked, and then they score in the next play. But that's neither here nor there. I've moved on. You know, took a month and a half, but Georgia will be back. I guarantee it. You know, it's one of those things where the number 2 recruiting class with the young quarterback who has some games under his belt, Stockton. Paul, I tell you, man, you know, we got Alabama week 3 at home. I'm going to keep my mouth shut, but over the summer I'm going to start throwing some balls and start talking smack to my boy Jim down there in Tuscaloosa and all the Alabama fans. Week 3 in Athens. But cheer hurt, 11-3, especially to Notre Dame, man. Come on. You know, Big Ten gets the props. It's one of those things where Georgia, we got some kids coming back, 5-star, lost a lot to the NFL draft. Much like Alabama, no excuse. We'll be back too, brother. Love your show. That's all I got. And
thank you very much, Dope Bulldog, calling from L.A. Let's check in now with Hulk, who is up next. Good afternoon.
Hey, Mr. Finebaum, thanks for taking my call, sir.
Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm a first-time caller. My question is, do you think that someone will ever introduce a bill where some funds from the lottery, the state lottery, will be earmarked to support college athletes for that state? Well, hang up and listen to your call, sir.
Yeah, I think, I mean, listen, it's already, you are aware it's happening, it's been happening in Georgia with the Hope Scholarship, but it's not for athletics. I don't think you're going to see a lottery, first of all, whether Alabama could ever get a lottery or not. But I don't think you're going to get that. I hope you don't. Frankly, I would much rather see what Georgia has done and try to support non-athletes going to get an education as opposed to athletes who are already getting almost everything you could imagine.
I really appreciate that, Paul.
Yeah,
Thank
I mean,
you for
listen,
taking my call,
a lottery is primarily for education. That's what they sell it as. But that's education for the entire state, not the football program at Alabama or Auburn. Thank you for the call. We're heading to the break.